Okay, and if you're hello and welcome. Thank you to everybody for being here and for spending your evening with us today. My name is Jonathan Cohn. I'm the policy director at Progressive Massachusetts, and we're delighted to be kicking off a series of forums, starting with this one, kind of with the frame of DC attacks, Massachusetts fights back, knowing that that is such important work for us to be doing at this time when we see, as the speakers here will talk about, all of the different ways in which
Ollie.
if you're not kind of a speaker, please do mute if you're not no, here since we are recording. Uh, when we see all of the kind of the chaos, corruption, and cruelty coming down from Washington, D.C., it's important for states like Massachusetts to be doing what they can to fight back, to preserve the progress we've already made in Massachusetts, and to continue moving forward. And we also wanted to have this series, particularly in that mind, to be drawing connections between what's happening on the federal level and what's happening at the state level, what impacts that has here in Massachusetts, and what are steps that we can take here in Massachusetts, knowing that, as I often point out to people, we have the second largest Democratic supermajorities in the country. So we have different political conditions in Massachusetts. And also, how can we take advantage of that to continue the fight forward and kind of on all of the issues that we care about? So, as noted, we are planning this as a series of events that will be the first Wednesday of each month, and we look forward to seeing you at future ones throughout the year. I also want to make sure to thank our co-sponsor this evening, Physicians for a National Health Program, Massachusetts chapter. PNHP does such amazing work advocating for a vision where everyone has access to the highest quality healthcare. Imagine that. That should already be the case in this country. And I'm grateful to have folks like PNHP in Massachusetts and around the country continuing to fight for that vision. So I think that that's enough for me for just my opening welcome and greeting here. And I will hand it over now to Enid Eckstein, who's going to say a few framing remarks for the event tonight. So take it away, Enid.
Okay, thank you, and welcome to everybody. It's great. We have a lot of people who have signed up for this today. So we all knew when, basically, why were we picking this topic? Well, we knew that when Trump got elected in November, Trump 1.0 was not the friendliest to science. In fact, he overrode all sorts of health and science agencies to change reporting, recommendations. He did not believe in science, and we all know that what that looked like. So when Trump 2.0 came into power, we felt we had to do something, and everybody talked about what does the resistance look like. And in Progressive Mass, we had a number of conversations about what were some of the key things that we saw coming down the pike, and identified that the attack on science would be just, one of the major, goals and programs that Trump would have. Certainly, and even during the campaign when he announced that he was going to name Robert Kennedy for Health and Human Services. So now Trump is in power. We are now living under Trump 2.0, and our speakers tonight are going to talk about what this really means in terms of the attack on science. But I'm just going to reel off a couple of quick things, and then we're going to move into our program. We've seen the appointments of vaccine skeptics, which people will talk about, science deniers, censorship, uh, you know, freezing, canceling billions and billions of dollars of research money. We've seen layoffs of federal employees. We've seen devastation of certain departments in HHS. But importantly, as our speakers tonight will talk about, this is an attack on science, but it is really also an attack on our regional economy, an attack on the future of our country, which people will talk about. So tonight's program was really an attempt to give an overview of what is happening, and then some potential ways that people can join the resistance in terms of defending some of these programs. Uh, for Progressive Mass, tonight's program is a little bit of an experiment because we had a richness of speakers and we wanted to make sure that we hit both the local and the national picture. So we also will appreciate and not feel defensive at all about comments about the structure of this and the organization. So we hope at the end that you'd be willing to, put a few comments in the chat about what you felt worked or didn't work, because we're going to have in May and June, we're also going to have programs on some of the other issues that are going on, the attack in terms of healthcare spending, the attack potentially on trans rights, or so those are some of the programs we're thinking about. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John Kyriakis from Dedham to just talk a little bit so people will know, like essentially what the National Institute for Health does and what it is. And then we'll have our speakers. So speaking tonight is Nancy Krieger. We have Gordy Schiff. We have Sarah Neville, and then we have Melissa Vega and Katie Blair, and they will sort of lay out, what the picture looks like and what we can do. So John, take it away.
So hello, everybody. Welcome to the meeting. I'm going to need to be able to share my screen, if that's possible. I could also read off the slides and not bother, whatever works.
You have screen sharing power now.
Okay. Hang on. This is taking a longer time than necessary. I'm just going to read off the slides, and I will, because it's going to take a long time. All right. So
John, if you want to send me the slide deck, I'm happy to screen share for you. But
I think I can get through it without having to show the slides. All right. So the National Institutes of Health, its mission statement says that it's basically seeking fundamental knowledge about the nature and behavior of living systems, and the application of that knowledge to enhance health, lengthen life, and reduce illness and disability. The organization was founded in the late 1880s in its early stage, but it became what it is today basically in the early 1930s. And it is now the preeminent institution in this country for the support and implementation of biomedical research. So NIH supports biomedical research nationwide. They maintain a research campus in Bethesda, Maryland that carries out cutting-edge basic and clinical research. But they also, and this is by far the largest part of their operation, they support extramural research in laboratories and at universities and hospitals in every state in the Union. Funding for NIH in 2024 was close to $49 billion. And this money supports the salaries of lead scientists, but it also supports the salary of students, including graduate students, and in some cases, undergraduate students, postdoctoral fellows, and it also supports the purchases of supplies and equipment. NIH also funds, in collaboration with pharma, some ongoing clinical trials. NIH facilities and administration costs are a separate aspect of NIH funding, and that supports the lab and building maintenance, utilities, equipment maintenance, and administrative staff. This particular funding, which has been brutally targeted by the Trump administration, is essential for allowing the smooth operation of a research laboratory. You cannot work in a building that the electricity has been cut off in or the plumbing doesn't work. Support for extramural work comes in the form of highly competitive grants. And investigators apply for these grants. And typically, for an average sort of basic grant, only about 8 to 10% of these applications are approved for funding in each grant cycle. NIH funds are critical to the Massachusetts economy. Massachusetts received close to $3.5 billion, which is the highest per capita in the nation. And this funds nearly 5,000 research projects, and $1 billion of that $3.5 billion is allocated for indirect costs. Every dollar in NIH funding generates over $2 in added economic activity. And so factoring that in, NIH funding supports an estimated $7.75 billion annually in the Massachusetts economy. And it supports over 30,000 jobs in the state. And groundbreaking science in Massachusetts is also supported by NIH. And one example of that is the 2024 Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine, was awarded to two Massachusetts scientists, Victor Ambrose at UMass and Gary Ruvkin here at Mass General Hospital. And that's not to mention also the work that's being done by our eminent speakers. So should I introduce our first speaker? All right, I'll go ahead. So our first speaker is Nancy Krieger. She is a world-renowned professor of social epidemiology at the Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences at the Harvard T.H. Scan of Public Health. And she's also director of the HSPH Interdisciplinary Concentration on Women, Gender, and Health. And through this work, she seeks to advance health justice. She's been recognized extensively by her colleagues and awarded numerous prestigious prizes, most recently the 2023 Sedgwick Memorial Prize for Distinguished Service in Public Health, which is a very high honor, especially if it's coming from your close colleagues. So welcome to Dr. Krieger.
Thank you very much, and let me share my slides. Okay, so thank you very much kindly for the introduction and also for including me tonight. It's so important to get people mobilized around these issues. In addition to my professional role at the School of Public Health, I'm also co-founder and chair of the Spirit of 1848 Caucus of the American Public Health Association, which is concerned with issues of social justice and public health. And tonight I speak on my own behalf and not represent any institution. And what I want to do is give some bigger framing as well as a lot of specifics about what it means to think about health justice and critical science in a time of oligarchy and what I term opportunistic science denialism, what the attacks are and what the resistance is. And as I just want to say a few framing things around our living in a time of oligarchy. That means government by and for rapacious, wealthy elite, which is a state of affairs with disastrous implications for people's health, health inequities, and also planetary health. In the US, as many of you know, three persons that were at Trump's inauguration, Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg, possess more wealth than the bottom half of Americans. That's 170 million people. And as Sanders recently remarked, these three multi-billionaires are working with Trump because they understand. Yes?
People have asked you to speak slower.
Okay, I'll try. I always go on a roll. As Senator Sanders remarked, these three multi-billionaires are working with Trump because they understand one very important reality. Trump's policies are designed to make the very richest people in this country even richer, end quote. Globally, according to the 2024 UBS Global Wealth Report, quote, the top of the world's wealth pyramid is made up of just 14 people who collectively own close to 2,000 billion US dollars, end quote. Everyone here by now is familiar with the increasingly devastating and inequitable impacts of climate change and ecological degradation tied to fossil fuel consumptive economies, which are geared to maximizing private wealth. This all matters for understanding what the attacks are on science. And so let me quickly now, this is a slight review of what was just shared, so I think it helps to see some of the numbers. That NIH funding is a non-trivial contributor to the state's economies and educational systems, let alone the actual real-world good that the research can actually do. As you see, there was $35 billion in 2024 awarded to researchers across 50 states and DC. As you already mentioned, John, there's an economic return of $2.56 for every dollar investigated. In Massachusetts alone, you can see some of the major groups that got funding. NIH was awarded $3.5 billion and employed nearly 150,000 people. You can also see that there's a breakdown of funds available for what the NIH funds are by Massachusetts Congressional District. And note that the lion's share goes to Congressional District 7, Ayanna Pressley's district, because that includes the Longwood Medical Area, which is the site of my School of Public Health, but also Harvard Medical School and numerous hospitals. NIH dollars matter explicitly to Boston. Now, for oligarchs to control the economy and the material resources and information needed to cement this control, they need science, or at least certain types of science. At the same time, they need to distance themselves from scientific evidence that links their actions to harm. In the past decade, anti-science attacks have increasingly focused on the mounting evidence of the myriad harms caused by the intertwined climate and environmental crises tied to the pursuit of profits by petrochemical industries and corporations promoting mass consumption of their processed products. The denial of such harm during the first Trump administration and its trumpeting of what it called, quote unquote, alternative facts led to the first ever March for Science that was protest in 2017 that was held on Earth Day, and it was observed in countries around the world. Yet, as some of us back then were questioning the uncritical stance of standing up for science, because the question is, whose science? For what purposes? For example, in 2017, the Guardian newspaper broke the story about Cambridge Analytica, led by Robert Mercer, an economist turned big data billionaire, who was the first to weaponize the science of IT capacity for political campaigns via using illegally harvested Facebook data for massive and rapid, widespread reaching propaganda, disinformation, and lies to influence elections. Or consider the case now of Elon Musk, who certainly relies on science for his batteries, cars, and rocket ships, some successful, others not, their exploded debris most recently pummeling those living in the Caribbean. Also raising questions about whose science, the 2017 March very logo used atomic imagery, a stark reminder of the role of science in creating the atom bomb. Hence the opportunistic science denialism that we're seeing now, a boosting of science when it promotes the needs of oligarchy, and a denial of science when that science produces quote unquote inconvenient facts pointing to harm caused. Enabled by the frenetic pace of life driven by IT, as soon as the second Trump administration was in power, it ramped up its selective attacks on science at a dizzying pace, targeting not only climate and environmental science, but science it deemed quote unquote woke, especially in relation to issues of gender and racism and sexuality, and also COVID and vaccines. Yet, as a surprise to scientists not doing this type of research, it also went after the entire biomedical field, with these attacks following the authoritarian playbook of decimating universities because they are perceived as being too quote unquote liberal and a threat to their oligarchic views. This stance is made clear by this initial list of words that was used to identify and defund quote unquote suspect NSF grants. Revealing the profound censorship at play, the list of disappearing words, that is, disappearing from U.S. government websites, databases, and publications, is fast increasing, as shown by this New York Times article published on March 7th. Erasing words, of course, is a first step to try to alter and erase reality, if not actual people. So what does this disappearing entail? This excerpt from a Washington Post story on March 11th points to how the administration is trying to make problems go away by suppressing the evidence, or as the Post put it, quote, reshaping reality by hiding data, end quote. Yet another permutation of the longstanding regressive ploy of no data, no problem. Also disappearing is years of conceptual work foundational to health equity. For example, definitions formulated by the NIH National Institute of Minority Health and Health Disparities, or NIMHD, regarding what they call minority health and health disparity, which identified as causes, quote, discriminatory to acts, end quote, and being, quote, underserved in healthcare, end quote, totally disappeared between February 7th and 15th and are no longer available. Similarly, all the recent careful work of the NIH Office on Research on Women's Health explaining how sex and gender are both multidimensional variables and both warrant attention was axed swiftly on January 22nd, as there was their work also on women's health, equity, and inclusion. Taking this even further, it was already mentioned this evening, on February 28th, NIH started taking the unprecedented step of terminating already funded grants if they ran afoul of the new administration's ideology. As revealed by a leak to Nature of the NIH memo authorizing these terminations, the first set of grants targeted were concerned with LGBTQ plus populations, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, or had foreign subcontracts to China. I know this personally from being in the first batch of terminated grants with my R01 grant on advancing novel methods to measure and analyze multiple types of discrimination for population health research, which was in its final years, was terminated on account of having been categorized as DEI. And this was a scientific study. It was not about DEI programs or initiatives. As reporting in The Atlantic has underscored, these types of ideological terminations are unprecedented and are totally different for the usual grounds for termination due to scientific misconduct, which is in fact quite rare. Indeed, the Atlantic's headline made clear the mayhem has resulted in, quote, decades of cuts in a matter of days, end quote. As of March 30th, the tally is 16 billion and 68,000 jobs lost, including for Massachusetts, 1.5 billion and 6,713 jobs lost, with 542 million of those loss being here in Boston, Suffolk County. Fortunately, resistance to these regressive acts rebounds. In the US, the Data Rescue Project, for example, has been helping to coordinate myriad efforts to preserve and make accessible the otherwise disappearing data and websites across myriad government agencies. Employees at these agencies with deep knowledge of their data systems have likewise been creating alt networks to engage in restoration work. Additionally, to help build attention to the disappearing health equity data and websites while simultaneously building community, I helped instigate and co-organize two well-attended hybrid datathons, the first centered on the federal data and websites back on January 31st, and the second on March 14th, focused on state-level data and websites. But this is not the same as doing the work that's needed to continue producing data going forward, which is deeply threatened. This wholesale assault on the biomedical and scientific enterprise, in turn, prompted the March 7th, 2025 updated version of the 2017 Stand Up for Science protests, with rallies taking place in cities around the US and also internationally in solidarity. This time, however, the organizers included clear policy goals and concrete plans for action that go beyond simply standing up for science, with the three overarching demands being first, to end censorship and political interference in science, second, to secure and expand scientific funding, and third, to defend diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility in science. There is also rising resistance by myriad lawsuits. One example is the lawsuit about a published article taken down from a government website that we'll be hearing about because it included a factual sentence about groups at increased risk of suicide, which included LGBTQ populations. Other lawsuits are challenging the defunding of DEI programs. This afternoon, a lawsuit was just filed on behalf of the ACLU, the American Public Health Association, IBIS Reproductive Health, and also some individuals who are plaintiffs against the wholesale termination of the NIH grants. And I'm very grateful to be able to be an affected APHA member who's represented in that suit. Courts have also ordered websites to be restored, albeit in the case of those involving gender identity and sexuality, they now add quite the horrific government disclaimer, saying that any, quote, any information on this page promoting gender ideology is extremely inaccurate and disconnected from immutable biological reality that there are two sexes, male and female. And they go on to say that the page does not reflect biological reality, and therefore the administration and the department rejects it. So the government is saying the information that previously was vetted on government websites is no longer to be trusted. The new head of the EPA, Zeldin, who on his agency website has described his push for deregulation of pollutants and greenhouse gases as, quote, driving a dagger straight into the heart of the climate change religion, end quote, has acted to close EPA's environmental justice offices because they consider race and hence in his views are quote unquote discriminatory. And these actions have prompted legal challenges and challenges by elected officials who have sharply stated that the discrimination at issue is the elevated risk of exposure to pollution in communities of color, not rectifying this harm. So returning to the theme of why critical science is vital to countering oligarchy and opportunistic science denialism, know that the evidence makes clear that the kind of inheritance that matters most for explaining population health and health inequities is social inheritance, not biological inheritance, and the consequent impacts on social and biophysical exposures. By concentrating wealth among an elite few and despoiling the biophysical world while exploiting people to gain this wealth, oligarchy, by definition, produces and exacerbates health inequities. Know, too, that it profoundly matters who will be blamed by whom for the health, environmental, and climate problems. If our work did not matter, it would not be attacked in the way that it is. Oligarchs will, of course, seek to blame others, especially those who they consider to be their inferiors. It is our job instead in public health to stop the scapegoating and to document and make vividly clear the causal connections between economic and social inequity, illiberalism, and the people's health. So that's what really matters, and that's why this science is being attacked. So to wrap up, we need to be doing our work informed by history and a deep recognition of our interconnection with and dependence on each other and our wondrous and threatened planet. Another world is possible, one on this one planet that we all share. Thank you.
I say, Nancy, thank you so much. And I saw some folks ask in the chat if you could share the slide deck for people to take a look at afterwards.
Am I up to introduce our next speaker?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So our next speaker is Gordon Schiff. He's a practicing physician and internist, expert in patient safety and practice, and associate professor at Harvard Medical School. He's a principal investigator on a number of projects related to improving medication and patient safety. He's the author of more than 200 papers and the recipient of multiple awards. He's also a plaintiff in an ACLU censorship case against the Trump administration. So welcome, Dr. Schiff.
Thank you. I'd like to start with just a little musical interlude to kind of introduce our transition here. Let us catch our breath for a second. Hope people can hear that.
In many a time, in many a land, with many a gun in many a hand, they came by the night, they came by the day, came with their guns to take us away. With a knock on the door, knock on the door, here they come to take one more, one more.
So unfortunately, and I think that's why I'm here, was asked to speak today, our knock on the door came Friday evening, January 31st. Many of these are on Friday evenings issues. And we got an email from the editor of HRQ PSNet. I regret to inform you that your wonderful case commentary from 2022 on suicide risk assessment has been removed from the PSNet website due to perception that it violates a White House policy on websites that inculcate and promote gender ideology. And this is this presidential executive order defending women from gender ideology and extremism, restoring truth to the federal government. So here's the article that we published, and really was quite shocked that this article, which was about suicide and suicide prevention, was targeted. And you can get this article on now the Wayback. People like Nancy and other people have been trying to save some of these suppressed, censored articles. So why was our article removed? It was about an adolescent male, straight male, who had thoughts of killing himself. We discussed the screening and diagnosis and management of suicide, which is a very serious problem, 50,000 deaths a year if people, I'm sure everybody knows somebody and their family. It's a tragic situation. So we mentioned in the article that the risk factors are male sex, being young, veterans, indigenous tribes, and lesbian and gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning, LBGQ, BTQ, which obviously came up in this electronic dragnet along with serious mental illness, prior suicide attempts. So these are simply the evidence-based risk factors, but this article therefore had to be removed. We found out several days later, this is also from our team, we're working with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, the Betsy Lehman Center, that an article on endometriosis was removed. Now, why was endometriosis removed? It's a condition that affects actually 1 out of 10 women. We're interested in diagnostic delays, and this is a condition that's often delayed up to 7 to 10 years, with women suffering longer than they should. And one of the points, it was actually the last line of the article, although not germane to this particular case that was discussed, it's important to note that endometriosis could occur in trans and non-gender conforming people. Lack of understanding of this fact can make the diagnosis more challenging. So again, this article was also removed. This was, after being contacted by actually the Yale Law School students and the American Civil Liberties Union, we ended up being plaintiffs in a lawsuit challenging the removal of this article. And this is link to the 29-page lawsuit, and Dr. Royce is the author of the endometriosis article. I wrote the article on suicide with two psychiatrists. So, and this is just one of the points in this long legal document, which is, over my head but it says defendant's censorship violates the First Amendment by imposing a viewpoint based on unreasonable restriction of plaintiff's speech, violates the Administrative Procedure Act because it's arbitrary and capricious, further violates it because it exceeds the statutory authority. Plaintiffs request they declare the censorship unlawful, restore the censored research to the AHRQ website. So this is sort of where things, where until the second knock on the door on Friday night, March 28th, and we learned from the editor another letter that we got, the whole diagnosis community, that the PSNet, the entire PSNet was having the plug pulled on it. Due to shifting priorities of the agency, we'll no longer be supporting PSNet. Millions of readers, 41,000 prescribers, and again, that's the regret. I just want to tell you what PSNet is. This is part of the AHRQ patient safety website. These were the web M&Ms. We were two of these 663 web M&Ms, but lots of resources. I looked back before my talk. I used it 10 times in the past week for my teaching and research. It's a very valuable. There's over, again, 41,000 prescribers, carefully reviewed content, peer-reviewed, the M&Ms. It's a repository of 3 decades of research. If you want to talk about effectiveness and efficiency, this is the work of AHRQ. So who's taking this down and why? And why would we remove something that helps organizations practice more efficiently? And so this is actually by Martha Bieber, who's an WBUR. She says, you may not have heard of PSNet, but and I don't, I for one didn't know what it was, but I sure hope my doctor does use it. Talks about the resources actually for diagnosing migraines. So ready for knock on the door part 3. Okay. And this came again just in this past week. And I think people are familiar with this HHS transformation to make America healthy again by laying off 20,000 workers in HHS. So, and HRQ, by the way, we heard $50 billion in NIH. AHRQ is a little agency, 1/100th the budget of NIH. It's always been a very small and underfunded operation that's had a very big impact in terms of the actual care of the patients and preventing errors. But this is now to be ended. It's to be merged into it looks like a politically directed combined agency called the Office of Strategy to make sure it conforms with the Secretary's policies. And then this is what's been referred to, and this is 2 days ago, the crystal knot of public health. So on 4/1, and this is an email from the Academy of Health, who's one of the premier academic conferences that's held every year. As you've heard, brutal, unlawful. This isn't me using this language. This is this distinguished Academy of Health effort. Brutal, unlawful, short-sighted reduction in forces has just hit AHRQ. At least 100 staffers were sent this firing. In addition to the buyouts, that means over half the agency has been decimated or removed. They were formed when they were denied entrance to the office this morning. Again, this is just the day before yesterday. These are public servants who've worked tirelessly. 50% cut in AHRQ is like a 50% cut to a car. It doesn't just go half as fast. It just doesn't go anywhere. Let's be clear. These cuts are going to be very serious. People get sicker. This is a picture of people being badged. So the way these people were fired was they came to work on Monday and their badges didn't work. And that's how they learned that people were being fired. So this is pretty incredible in terms of how these people were being treated, but also the whole chaos and process here. So what do we need to know about AHRQ and what are we losing? I'll be quick here. Missed and delayed diagnosis of cancer. This is what I've been mainly working on and funded by HRQ. There's 10 of these centers working on this. Wrong site surgery. This is people x-ray the wrong site. Unnecessary and dangerous costly testing. Many projects minimize that over the years. Lost test results. We have something called the Patient Safety Learning Lab, working with engineers to make sure people get their test results. Honestly telling people when something goes wrong. ARC is funding multiple work in this. Access to primary care. We have a project looking at how much time doctors have in primary care or advanced practitioners, and is it enough? Overuse of antibiotics and growing resistance, and suicides and endometriosis, I just said, or strokes, lots of funding. So these are the last slides that I think are important, because it turns out there's actually a science of practicing safely in hospitals. And we've learned this over the years. These are lessons, these are scientific-based lessons. And I'll just read them. On November 6th, I woke up, and of course, we were all pretty depressed. And I started thinking, what is it that makes healthcare safer of what we've learned? Replacing blame with support and learning, driving out fears, honesty and integrity. I hope everybody gets the irony, the 180-degree opposite of the leadership we're having: humility, admitting errors, kindness and compassion, no to bullying. Doctors are bullying, surgeons who bully the employees. We've learned that creates a climate of fear and has more operating room errors when you have that kind of climate. Respect for women. Again, I'm going through this quickly. Fairness, overcoming gaps and past injustices. These are the kinds of things that we have to practice to make sure healthcare is safe and effective, driven by professionalism, not greed, cooperation rather than competition, and thinking about the future. What is the long-term effects of decimating these public health functions and infrastructure? So I think I just want to.
If you can do this last slide really quick.
Yeah.
Thank you.
These are the kind of things I think we need to do. You can see the legal actions, which I think in some ways is the least of it, but we have to resist in all these ways. We have to basically expose their actions and really make them own the consequences, which are going to be myriad. Connect the issues, forge coalition. The academy, there's major academic people who are finally waking up and joining this struggle, a long-term strategy, and realizing everything we do matters. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you can share and Gordy, if you, and Dr. Schiff, you can share the slide deck with us. We can send that and follow up as well. And then John, if you want to introduce our next speaker.
All right, so our next speaker is Sarah Elizabeth Neville. She's a postdoctoral research fellow at Brown University in the School of Public Health. She's currently being supported by an NIH-funded training grant. This is a type of grant that is necessary, used by institutions to support the training of postdocs and also graduate students. She's there. It's a training grant developing researchers who are studying young adult and adolescent HIV/AIDS. She's written her first independent NIH grant to study the mental health of children leaving orphanages in Ghana. Apparently, this grant application received a very high score that in the before times would probably have been sufficient to guarantee funding, but as we now know, it's all up in the air. So, thank you.
Thanks, John, and thanks also, John. I'll quick time check, John. John Cohn, how long do you want me to talk for?
Take about, let's say, like 6 minutes.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, it's a lot. I'm going to talk more from a personal perspective and kind of talk about how what's going on is affecting me in multiple domains of my life as an early career researcher, right? So, as you heard, the thing that I study in my research is orphan children in low and middle income countries, especially in Africa and Latin America. In addition to that, I'm a school committee member in Chelsea. So the administration is attacking me on like multiple aspects of my life right now. And I'm an early career researcher, which means I'm a postdoc. So I call it a kind of like doing a gap year between getting your PhD and getting a faculty position. And faculty positions are so hard to get that at every stage is like, I might not get to the next stage. I might not get to the next stage. I might not be able to stay in academia because it's so competitive. But when I got my score for my NIH grant through the National Institute of Mental Health, that was for my proposal for a 5-year proposal. It's called a K99R00 to study the mental health of orphan children in Ghana as they're leaving orphanages and joining their family. And it was signed off by my program officer in the NIH. I said, oh my God, I can't believe I made it. I made it. This K99R00 means that I have funding for my own salary for the next 5 years, and I'm pretty much guaranteed to land a faculty position here in Boston. I can stay in my community. I can stay in academia. I can stay doing the thing I'm passionate about. And then the next thing that happened in January, USAID started getting gutted and USAID. And I saw all of the people that I used to work with before I did my PhD doing all of these international development and global health projects getting laid off. Like my LinkedIn was like a graveyard with people all saying like, I'm open to work. I'm open to work. I've just been laid off. Um, and then I'm part of my union. I helped found my postdoc union at Brown. And now we're realizing that like that's gonna affect like we haven't even gotten our first contract yet. We just started fighting and like the Trump being in power and having influence over the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, means that graduate students, graduate workers, postdoctoral workers, non-tenure track workers, they're all gonna be so much less protected in their jobs and in their working conditions because the NLRB isn't gonna be as strong anymore in protecting them. And then I realized that they're starting to cut existing grants. And I realized that even though I got my score and I got the PO signed off on my grant, which is currently pending IRB review, um, the chances of me getting my grant are like so low, I think, because I heard now and now people like me were relying on rumors to try and plan out the next phase of our lives. My training grant, my postdoc, I can only stay on it until August. So because last summer I was told basically like you've got this funding coming that's going to get you it's going to cover you for 5 years. I didn't start applying for jobs during the fall tenure track job cycle because I thought I had a job for the next 5 years. And now I've realized they're not just like carefully scaling back funding, they're cutting active projects. And so the chances of them letting my project through when they've already destroyed USAID and they clearly hate global health and international development, they haven't cut global health NIH projects yet, but the chances of them letting that through are like slim to none. Now we're relying on rumors. People like me, PIs doing global health, we're calling each other up and saying like, "Hey, what did you hear from your NIH program officer? Have they said yet if they're going to cut global health yet?" And so that's where we are with that. So it's really depressing. And basically, when I got after, these like 7 years of like PhD and postdoctoral training or whatever, where I'm like preparing to dedicate my life to helping orphan children in Ghana, I'm learning that, never mind, it's not going to work out for me. And tons of early career researchers are in the same position where the US government and the NIH has invested in our training so that we can do this research. And now the rug is being pulled out from under us. And another aspect, international students, there's so many international students and international postdocs who are being targeted for just being in this country and for, writing op-eds or whatever. The Turkish student who was taken from Somerville, she was from the department, the Tufts University Elliott Pearson Department of Child Development, where I did my bachelor's and my master's. Like, this is so close to me and so close to all of us. And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on is that here in Chelsea, we suffer so much from health disparities here in Chelsea due to the social determinants of health and environmental injustice. And the field of health and health research and biomedical research and public health has made so many strides in the past couple decades in acknowledging how being low income, being immigrants, being in a place that around pollution and, the effects of capitalism or whatever, like harms your health. And there have been so many strides towards addressing these problems. And because all of these strides have been made, I started a program here in Chelsea called the Chelsea Research Festival. So what it does is so many of these um, like public health researchers are so interested in these topics that they do a lot of data collection in Chelsea. So I created a festival where those researchers can come and share their results back out to the community because that's so important for increasing community trust in research institutions because communities like mine have this like historical distrust of research in the medical establishment. And so this Chelsea Research Festival where we try and bridge academia and community is so important for doing that. And we're also trying to like strengthen the pipeline of researchers from underrepresented groups, from communities like Chelsea. So we also have students who are presenting their own projects and trying to empower them on seeing themselves as researchers as well. So, it's just so disheartening to it's not only about my career and like what I'm doing at Brown University in this big academic institution or whatever. It's also about my community here in Chelsea. We're getting so close to addressing these health problems and addressing these problems we have where there's not enough low income kids and kids of color who then become decision makers in research institutions, and where we have this gap between academia and community. And we're bringing everyone together, and it's just so disheartening to see how these institutions like the National Institutes of Minority and Disparities Research, I can't remember the institute name right now, but you know what I'm talking about, how in this so-called like DEI cuts are all just really cutting this work off at the knees, like just as we're like making strides in closing health inequities. So I just like, yeah, it really just sucks. And I just want to like tell everyone like we got to do something.
Sarah, thank you so much.
Amen.
And I realized before that I didn't have us do formal rounds of applauses for all our speakers. So before we bring on the next one, can we begin with doing the round of applause for Dr. Nancy Krieger? And then the round of applause for Dr. Gordon Schiff. And the round of applause for Dr. Sarah Neville. Okay, then handing over to you, John.
Okay, our next speaker is Melissa Vargas. She is a Science Network Senior Manager at the Union of Concerned Scientists. She manages the online community for the Science Network, a group of more than 20,000 scientists and technical experts interested in science advocacy. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you all for having me. Can I get screen sharing privileges? And maybe while I'm waiting, we can all just like take a deep breath. It's been a lot of bad news, a lot of really devastating personal and professional impacts that, y'all have heard about on the news, but have just been, brought even more close to home with our speakers tonight. So thank you all to my former panelists, previous panelists for sharing. And I'm gonna hopefully change the vibes a little bit and talk about what's happening in terms of the response, the scientist resistance, the evidence-based outrage that scientists and public health professionals are engaging in to push back against some of these, truly awful attacks. And I will also just add, UCS is a nonpartisan national science advocacy nonprofit. And if you are interested in getting involved, I encourage you to look us up and join with us because we need everyone in this fight. So scientists and science supporters are welcome. And scientists are mad. and they're taking action. So I wanted to highlight 4 strategies that we're deploying at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and also that I'm seeing across the scientific community, that are giving me hope and that to me demonstrate that there is some momentum in this resistance that we're seeing. So first, there's sourcing and sharing resources to support federal scientists, federal workers who are being threatened and pushed out by the administration. Very early on, many organizations, including the unions and legal organizations, developed guidance and resources on knowing your rights, sort of wonky internal procedures like how to make a note on the record, how to find lawyers, job searching support, even mental health support for federal workers. Organizations like the Climate Science Legal Defense Fund, Democracy Forward, the Federal Unionist Network have been huge assets for federal science workers and science organizations as we come together and try to address threats to science and science-based decision-making. And honestly, these legal organizations and other progressive organizations like Progressive Mass have been a little bit better at some of the rapid response work than science organizations. So we're also leaning on you all to nudge us to take action and be a little bit quicker in responding to some of these attacks. Next, calling out attacks on science and scientists within the federal government and really highlighting what these impacts look like as we've talked about here tonight. So UCS helped organize now 55 scientific societies who've signed on to a letter to call on Congress to protect federal funding and push back against scientist harassment. There have been other letters and statements from scientific leaders, some public and some behind the scenes that are pushing back against attacks on programs and initiatives. And again, these programs have a lot of support from the public. Things like clean drinking water, food inspections, preventing toxic chemicals from going into our consumer goods, accurate weather forecasts. All of these things are generally very popular and have tons of public support. And so the second piece of this is highlighting the impacts across the country of these cuts to federal grants and cuts to federal agencies. So there are many organizations who are collecting stories from federal scientists about what it means that their research has been defunded, like we just heard Sarah talking about, or that their teammates have been fired, or that the future of their project is uncertain, and really explaining what it means to folks around the country who may not be thinking about the impacts of federal research in their day-to-day lives. And what we know about good storytelling is that, first, it connects to shared values. So things like creating a better future for our children, embracing curiosity and innovation, leaving the earth a better place than we found it. We know that good stories are specific. They speak to personal experience. And stories ideally identify both a problem and provide a solution to that problem. And so we've been collecting stories from scientists and federal workers and are working with them to get those stories into local media and to elected officials who can hopefully push back at the state and federal levels. And many organizations are doing their own story collection work and are connecting those folks with reporters and decision makers to try to apply some public pressure around this front. Fighting back against attacks to politicize or eliminate scientific roles or agencies in federal government, because it's not just individual grants, it really is at this point entire agencies that are being gutted. So organizations like the American Geophysical Union have joined with federal employee unions as a plaintiff in a lawsuit. I was super stoked to hear Nancy mention earlier that the American Public Health Association has joined unions in a lawsuit against the cuts to NIH grants. I don't know how many of you are familiar with scientific societies and associations, but scientific societies do not sue the federal government very often. They are typically quite conservative in terms of advocacy and pushing back against, what's happening federally. So this really is a big deal. The Union of Concerned Scientists is also working with legal partners and has filed a lawsuit against DOJ. So we are trying to use, really every tool at our disposal to fight back against efforts to eliminate these critical scientific agencies. Oh, look, there we go. And finally, we are building and demonstrating public support for scientists and science-based agencies. Many of you may have seen the Stand Up for Science rallies a few weeks ago. There have been rallies popping up all around the country, especially near federal agencies. I was at the DC rally. My colleagues in Chicago got snowed on at the Chicago rally. These rallies are really important to demonstrating to the media, to elected officials, and to the administration that we will not normalize what is happening. We will continue to fight. Storytelling also ties back into this need for building and demonstrating public support because we need to talk about these impacts in Massachusetts and around the country. We come together for these types of rallies and these moments, not necessarily because we think one more rally is going to fix everything, but because we know that we can't let these attacks go by without responding to them. So we show up, we'll continue to show up, and we have to take action today so that we are able to take action tomorrow so they don't outlaw and censor our ability to show up and protest. Okay, sorry, I'll step down from my soapbox and hand it over to, I think, Katie, who's going to talk about some of the local actions and opportunities.
And before that, can we get a round of applause? Melissa, thank you so much. And John, if you want to introduce our next speaker.
Sorry, I was muted. Our next speaker is Katie Blair. She's the director of the Massachusetts Families for Vaccines, and she was a lead organizer for Boston's Stand Up for Science rally on March 7th, which was a great event. My wife and I were both there, and we had, I think, 3 Nobel laureates and a bunch of other very energetic and passionate speakers calling on the community to support science through these troubling times. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you. So yeah, John, I don't know if you can put up the slides or I can try to pull them up.
I can bring them up. Give me 1 sec.
Awesome. Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much to Progressive Mass for hosting this event. I am really honored to have been invited, especially alongside such amazing speakers. Slides coming up. All right. Yeah, so I'm just going to talk briefly about a couple of things I've been involved in recently. Yeah, so like was mentioned, I was the lead organizer for Boston's Stand Up for Science rally on March 7th, which was part of a nationwide series of events, kind of picking up the mantle from March for Science a few years ago. This will be kind of repeating what Melissa already talked about. Yeah, so for those who are comfortable attending protests, I think staying involved with those kinds of events can be a really valuable way to stay engaged in Massachusetts, to show both our state and federal representatives that science funding is something that we care about, and also to get a chance to connect with others who feel the same way, who are also at the event, and you can talk to them. I know there's a big protest this Saturday that I'm sure a lot of you are planning to go to, the Boston Common. Yeah, so on March 7th, I think we had a great event. We did have 2 Nobel laureates. I don't think there were 3, but we had another one who might as well be. And a US congressman also, along with many other fantastic speakers at all stages of their careers. But we definitely don't want it to be a one and done kind of thing. We have a pretty active Massachusetts group, as well as a national Stand Up for Science organizing team that is continuing to stay engaged. and to plan more actions and to support other groups' actions, like the one on Saturday. So if you're interested in helping out with future events, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat once I'm done talking. So you can do the next slide. Yeah, so then the other thing I'm here to talk about is that I run a group called Massachusetts Families for Vaccines. So we are a public health advocacy group that works with a broad coalition of other organizations to support pro-vaccine policies throughout the state. The main bill that we're advocating for right now is H2554/S1557. I'll put that in the chat later too. An act relative to vaccines and preventing future disease outbreaks. The main thing it would do is end the use of the non-medical exemption or the religious exemption for schools in Massachusetts. It would also improve data tracking for school immunizations, since we actually have a lot of schools right now that don't report their data or don't report all of it. So several other states have eliminated the exemption in recent years, including California, New York, Maine, and Connecticut, and they've seen their rates go up after the change. The Massachusetts medical community is pretty much fully in agreement that getting rid of the exemption is the best way to increase vaccination rates. The problem is that as vaccines have become really politicized in recent years, the religious exemption functionally acts as a loophole for people with like political opposition to vaccines or for parents who have fallen prey to misinformation online. And as the use of the exemption goes up, it can be really dangerous for the whole community, especially people with compromised immune systems who like might not be able to get vaccinated or it might not work for them. Also for infants who are too young to be vaccinated. And of course, it's also dangerous just for the unvaccinated children themselves, even if they're otherwise healthy. And for any of the rare cases where someone received a vaccine, but the immunity has worn off. Vaccines are really important tools, incredible tools for public health, but they don't work 100% of the time. So we really need a high level of community engagement to protect everyone, especially for something like measles, where you need 95% of people to be vaccinated to have strong herd immunity. We can do the next slide. So Massachusetts generally has pretty good immunization rates, but there are pockets of the state and especially some individual schools where the vaccine coverage is much lower. It's those places where outbreaks can happen. So note this data is a couple years old, it's from 2022, but it's still pretty representative of where some of the schools with lower vaccination rates are located. So it tends to be like more Western Mass, like Cape and Islands, but you can see it's like kind of all over for some of the individual schools. So we've actually been trying to pass this bill since 2019. This is the fourth legislative session that we've introduced it in. The Rep. Varga has introduced it in, our lead sponsor, who's awesome. But it really feels uniquely urgent right now, given what's happening at the federal level. We have a notorious anti-vaccine activist who is running HHS, and there have been hundreds of cuts to vaccine programs and thousands of health workers who have been laid off. And this is all happening in the same year that there's already been more measles cases than in all of 2024 because of the outbreak in Texas and New Mexico, which is definitely not going to stay just in the Texas area. Like people travel, it goes all over the place. Do the next slide. So obviously I disagree very strongly with anti-vaccine activists on a lot of things, but the one thing I will always give them credit for is that they are extremely well organized. It's a bad thing, but it is impressive. So I created my group to try to solve that collective action problem, where you have a small group that has a fringe view that is extremely vocal. And then on the other hand, you have a big majority that supports vaccination and vaccinates their kids appropriately on time, but doesn't realize that this is something that they need to reach out to their representatives about. So we're looking for people who will reach out to their state legislators and let them know this is important to them and that they should, the legislators should co-sponsor or otherwise support the bill, move it through the committees and get it to a vote. There's also going to be a hearing at some point in the Public Health Committee where the bill is like located right now. And we would really love to talk to anyone who is able to take the time to testify, because I can assure you that vaccine skeptics will have hundreds of people there. They have the last several times that we've done this. The nice thing is that you should be able to testify online. I think they extended the opportunity to do that, which I think makes it so much more accessible, especially if you are like immunocompromised and don't feel comfortable going to a big crowded place. We're also doing a lobby day at the State House with March of Dimes on April 16th. So if you're interested in taking a full day to head down there and talk to your representatives, we would also love to have you join us for that. And then one other thing, I'd also encourage you to support the work of organizations like Progressive Mass and Act on Mass that work on accountability and transparency in the Massachusetts legislature. Because I think the lack of transparency there is actually a big part of the reason why bills like ours take so long to pass. Yeah, so my email is there on the screen for anyone watching the recording, and then I'm also going to put it in the chat, which might also show up on the recording, I don't know. But I would love to talk to any of you who'd like to get involved in promoting a strong public health policy on the state level. And thank you so much for having me.
Awesome, thank you. And can we get a round of applause for Katie? Enid, did you want to do some of the ending work, or do you want me to do it? You're muted.
Yeah, you can do it, but there was a request in the chat to, if possible, to see the last of Gordy's slide, which I think had some steps on resistance. I'm not sure if that was last of his slide or the last of Nancy's. There was a slide on particular steps on resistance, or maybe Gordy can say what he thinks were the last steps on resistance. I think it was, Gordy, your thing was join the resistance, rally, be like all the things that people have already talked about, right? Yeah, okay. And then the slides are going to be shared anyway.
Yes.
Okay, and then I think Jonathan was just going to talk about just briefly, some of the other important things that relate to this in the state.
Yes.
Okay.
And then we'll make sure that we send out all of the slides from our wonderful speakers this evening. One thing that we wanted to make a quick mention, to draw up some things in the chat first. I expect many people here will be at the rally on the Common this weekend, so I'll draw attention to the Mobilize link for that, and can drop it in the chat. Drop it in the chat again. That one of our speakers talked very eloquently about the importance of investing in our public health in Massachusetts, of needing a strong public health infrastructure when it comes to funding research, when it comes to protecting communities with good, sound public health policies. And one thing that we wanted to make sure to make a pitch for before the end of this is that one of the things that we'll realize that if we in Massachusetts need to start filling in the gaps from what the federal government is pulling back from, that takes money. That everything that we need to see, that we will need to do to protect the essential services that we have in Massachusetts, that will be even more important of investing in healthcare, investing in our public health infrastructure, investing in our transit systems that are essential to public health, in community health, and investing in the environmental protection that is also critical to human health. All of that will require money. And one thing that I've taken to pointing out recently is that we in Massachusetts like to talk about, if you have ever spoken to your legislators, I'll say, who here has ever had their legislator tell them that we don't have enough money to do something? What I always like pointing out to people is that we in Massachusetts have a similar GDP to the country of Sweden. It's higher than Sweden, it's higher than Belgium. Sweden and Belgium manage to do many things that Massachusetts does not with that size of the economy in terms of investing in their population. And so one critical campaign that we're a part of this year is the Corporate Fair Share campaign led by Raise Up Massachusetts, folks that you might know from the Fair Share Amendment campaign and a number of campaigns for workers' rights in the past. And that campaign, and I'll drop information. Actually, thank you, Enid, for dropping information in the chat, and we can send out a link and follow up as well. But making sure that the large corporations, like your Amazons, like your McDonald's, like your Walmarts, companies that are in many cases creating the public health problems that we're talking about, have to pay their fair share in taxes and can't dodge taxes by hiding all of their income overseas. That's what they're doing. That's what they're doing now. It's beautiful in Bermuda and the Cayman Islands, but that's not where their money should be staying. In Massachusetts, and what is always shocking to people, taxes a smaller share of that income that is offshored in places like the Bermuda and the Cayman Islands than New Hampshire does. and then the federal government does. And we in Massachusetts, as we're going to be facing the looming cuts in the federal government, need to be stepping up to make sure that we're doing right by everybody in our state and raising money from the folks who clearly have it in the state. We know that it's rich people and large corporations where that money is, and that when we tax rich people and large corporations, we can invest in all of us and make the Commonwealth a better place and truly deliver on that concept of a Commonwealth. So I wanted to make a picture of that, and I will also drop into the chat an opportunity for people to contact your legislators about that and contact your legislators and your Congress people about everything that you heard about tonight because they need to be hearing from you. That your legislators need to hear from you early and often, because, as I sometimes say, your legislators are lonely and they want to hear from you, but also just critical of that work of public accountability that needs to happen every day if we want to see anything change. So John or Enid, any closing remarks that you want to tag in with before we wrap up?
Yeah, I think we said at the beginning of this that this was really like the first of what we hope to be a series of webinars that really talk about the big picture of a national crisis, national attack, then how it really impacts Massachusetts, and then what we can do. So if you have thoughts about how we could have done this differently, other topics that we should take on, or what the structure could have been, or what have you, please feel free to drop an email to Jonathan or myself, and to the link that you got. I can put my email in here also. But I think this was a learning experience for us. And because we live in Massachusetts, we have so many great people that we could call on. So I also want to thank all the speakers because, I feel like there was a lot of richness here and there were different presentations and those will get sent out. So John, do you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, this what I'm
I
happy
was
to do.
asking the other John also.
Oh, other John. I say the party words, and then if anybody has questions and they want to stay on, we can free everybody for the evening after John closes this out, but then can also allow anybody who stays on who has a question to stay on with a question.
So I want to also extend my thanks to the speakers. This was relatively quickly organized, and so I'm grateful that everybody could find the time to show up and do this very important topic that has so much. It's personal to me because I was once upon a time I was a scientist and before I retired at NIH support for 30 years. So I am particularly grateful to the speakers for their support and to all the people who came today and hoping that you'll take action.
Thank you.
Awesome. So if we can get another round of applause for our speakers. And I'll do another round of applause for all of you for being with us this evening. And we will make sure that you get follow-up information about the presentations that our speakers gave. I'll drop into the chat as well. This will come in the follow-up email to you. We are in the midst of booking speakers for it, but our next of this forum series happening in May is going to focus on the attacks on mass health. So when we're here talking often about science and public health, and it's very clear that the Republicans in Washington are trying to destroy healthcare. We know how important it is that we're investing in healthcare, but how everybody's healthcare has an impact on everybody else's, as well as the cuts on mass health would be destructive to the state budget, as well the same for Medicaid in other states. That with that point, I'm going to formally close this out, but allow people who have questions to stay on. We'll stay on for a few more minutes for questions, but I'll do a final thank you again, and then I'm going to close the recording, and I look forward to seeing everybody in many spaces as well as on Zoom again in a month.